We spend an enormous amount of time, like an incredible amount of energy, teaching girls to worry about what boys think of them.
Hmm.
We police their tone, their ambition, their volume. We tell them to be accommodating, to be soft, um, to smile more.
Right.
But we just do not spend a fraction of that time, if any time at all, really teaching boys to care about being, like, likable.
No, definitely not.
We don't teach boys to shrink themselves to make girls comfortable.
Mm.
And it's this striking, just fundamental imbalance in how we build human beings from the absolute ground up. And it shapes every single interaction we have for the rest of our lives.
Yeah, when you really stop and sort of isolate that simple contrast, how we actively construct femininity as this performance for the benefit of others,
Yeah, exactly.
while masculinity is constructed as this impenetrable fortress, right?
Yeah,
You start to see the microscopic cracks in the foundation of basically everything around us.
for sure.
It's binary, it is deeply ingrained in our psychology, and yet it is entirely, like, 100% invented.
Welcome to the Book Nook. We are so glad you're here with us today. For those of you joining us for the first time, this is the space where we explore the most impactful, transformative books in personal growth, psychology, and literature.
That's right.
And today, we are opening up a text that might be small in page count, but man, it is absolutely massive in its cultural footprint. We are looking at We Should All Be Feminists by the incredibly brilliant Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie.
It is, it's so crucial to establish right up front exactly where this text comes from because the context really informs the entire tone of the book.
Oh, absolutely.
This text was actually adapted from a highly acclaimed TEDx Houston talk she gave back in, I think, December of 2012. And, TEDx Houston is a conference specifically focused on Africa.
Right.
At this point in time, Adichie was already world-renowned. I mean, she had given the famous The Danger of a Single Story talk, which is
Oh, that one is legendary in its own right.
completely legendary. But she was actually quite nervous about giving this particular talk. She deeply suspected that the subject of feminism might face, a lot of resistance, perhaps even outright hostility from that specific audience.
Yeah.
But she pushed forward anyway because she felt it was a vital, just unavoidable conversation.
I mean, imagine stepping onto that stage.
Yeah.
You're looking out at a sea of faces that feel like family, but it's a family you strongly suspect might cross their arms, roll their eyes, and just, like, shake their heads at what you're about to say.
Exactly. You'd be bracing for impact.
Right. And yet, the incredible thing, by the end of her talk, she received this massive standing ovation. It just goes to show how deeply her message resonated when she chose to strip away all the dense academic jargon and simply speak about the lived, breathing, everyday human reality of gender.
Yeah, that grounded approach is everything.
So our mission for today's deep dive is to really unpack this book with you. We're going to dig into the incredibly heavy cultural baggage attached to the word feminist. We're going to explore the invisible ways gender expectations form a cage. And importantly, a cage that traps not just women, but, men too. And we want to really understand Adichie's powerful, surprisingly optimistic vision for how we can build a fairer world.
The concept of baggage is honestly the perfect place to start, because Adichie begins her exploration of feminism not with, like, a textbook definition, but with this deeply personal, somewhat tragic origin story about her very first encounter with that exact word.
Yeah, it's a very striking opening.
It transports us back to her childhood in Nigeria, specifically to one of her greatest childhood friends, a boy named Okoloma.
She describes Okoloma with such vivid affection. She says he lived on her street. He was known for wearing these pointy cowboy boots. He was funny, fiercely intelligent.
Right.
And he looked out for her like a protective older brother. She could truly talk to him, and more importantly, she could argue with him without fear.
Which is rare, right?
Yeah, very rare. But tragically, in December 2005, Okoloma died in a horrific plane crash in southern Nigeria. You can really feel the profound weight of that loss just simmering under her writing.
Yeah, you really can.
But she brings him up in this specific context because he holds a very distinct place in her intellectual life. Okoloma was the very first person to ever look at her and call her a feminist.
And we really have to be clear about the context here. It was absolutely not delivered as a compliment.
I'm not even close. I mean, they were about 14 years old at the time. They were hanging out at his house doing that exact thing teenagers do, where they just argue passionately using, all the half-baked knowledge they've absorbed from whatever books they're reading.
Right, the classic teenage debate.
Exactly. And Adichie says she was arguing and arguing her point, totally refusing to back down. Nagurma just looked at her and said, you're a feminist.
Mm.
Adichie notes his tone with just, like, surgical precision.
Hmm.
She says he delivered the word as if he were saying, you're a supporter of terrorism.
That comparison is incredibly striking. I mean, to a 14-year-old girl in Nigeria, being compared to a terrorist over a standard living room debate is incredibly loaded.
Yeah, it's intense.
The psychology of that moment is fascinating, too. Adichie admits she didn't even know what the word feminist meant at the time. She had literally never encountered it.
Wow.
Yeah. But, human beings are incredibly adept at reading subtext. The tone alone was enough. She intuitively knew it was bad. She knew it was an accusation, like a dirty word.
So what did she do?
Well, she brushes it off, she masks her ignorance to protect her pride, and she secretly plans to look the word up in the dictionary the very second she gets home.
Oh, I think we have all been in that exact position as teenagers, right?
Yeah.
Nodding along to a word we don't understand just so we don't look foolish.
Ex-
But it sets up perfectly how this word is treated less like a descriptive definition and much more like a weapon designed to silence. From that moment on, she tracks this somewhat hilarious yet totally poignant evolution of how she had to constantly modify her own identity because of the unsolicited advice she kept getting about this one single word.
Yeah, the evolution is so telling.
Let's fast forward a bit to 2003. She's promoting her novel, Purple Hibiscus, for those who haven't read it. This is a book that features domestic abuse. It deals with very heavy patriarchal themes.
Right, it's a very serious novel.
Yes. And during a promotional tour in Nigeria, a journalist, supposedly well-meaning guy, takes her aside to give her some, advice. He shakes his head sadly and warns her never to call herself a feminist.
And his reasoning is just incredible.
It really is. Why did he say that?
Mm.
Because, according to his worldview, feminists are women who are unhappy because they cannot find husbands.
Let's really analyze the underlying logic there, because it is astounding when you connect it to the broader cultural architecture.
Go ahead.
The journalist is operating on this assumption that a woman's ultimate goal, her only true source of validation and happiness, is securing a husband. Therefore, any woman advocating for equal rights or pointing out systemic abuse must only be doing so out of the bitter, twisted resentment of failing at that primary biological and social mission.
Right. It completely invalidates the intellectual, moral, and ethical grounding of feminism by reducing it to, like, a temper tantrum over being single.
Exactly. And Adichie, who possesses this wonderfully sharp sense of humor, decides not to fight him on his terms. Instead, she says, okay, fine, I'll call myself a happy feminist.
But the evolution doesn't stop there, does it? Because society is never satisfied when you try to reclaim level. Next, a Nigerian woman this time, which adds a fascinating layer of internalized bias, tells her that feminism is un-African.
Mm-hmm.
She claims it's a Western import, like a disease of thought entirely alien to their traditional culture, and that Adichie's only calling herself a feminist because her mind has been corrupted by reading Western books.
The irony of that accusation is certainly not lost on Adichie. She points out that her early reading diet was heavily dominated by those classic, incredibly cheesy Mills and Boon romance novels.
Oh, the romance paperbacks.
Yeah, exactly. These are books where the strong man sweeps the fragile woman off her feet. They are about as far from radical feminist literature as you can possibly get.
For sure.
In fact, she admits with refreshing honesty that whenever she tries to read what are considered the dense, classic feminist texts, she gets incredibly bored and often struggles to even finish them.
That's so relatable.
It really is. But because she is told by an authority figure that feminism is un-African, she playfully adapts her armor once again. She decides she is now a happy African feminist.
It's like a snowball rolling down a hill, just picking up more and more ridiculous qualifiers as it goes. Next, a friend tells her that calling herself a feminist automatically means she hates men.
Right, the classic trope.
So, she adjusts again. She becomes a happy African feminist who does not hate men. And eventually, this reaches its ultimate, tongue-in-cheek final form. She declares herself to the world as a happy African feminist who does not hate men and who likes to wear lip gloss and high heels for herself and not for men.
It's highly amusing, but the humor is doing incredibly heavy lifting here. What she's illustrating is just how extraordinarily burdened the word feminist is.
Yeah.
It is weighed down by decades, if not centuries, of negative assumptions and deliberate smear campaigns. The societal consensus suggests that if you claim this word, you hate men, you hate bras, you hate your own culture, you want to violently overthrow society.
And don't wear makeup.
Right. You don't wear makeup, you don't shave, you're constantly seething with unprovoked anger, you have absolutely zero sense of humor, and apparently you boycott deodorant.
Okay, let's unpack this mechanism because it really makes me think of like a piece of luggage. I want you, the listener, to visualize this.
Yeah.
Think of the word feminist like a suitcase moving slowly down the baggage carousel at a busy airport.
Okay, I like this.
You know what's actually inside the suitcase? It's just basic human rights, equality, fairness.
Mhm.
But over years, society has completely plastered the outside of this suitcase in warning stickers.
Oh, wow.
Huge, neon glaring stickers. Hazardous material, man-hater, warning, always angry, caution, will destroy your marriage. The suitcase is so entirely covered in these alarming, ugly, terrifying stickers that nobody even wants to pick it up off the carousel, let alone open it to see what's actually inside.
That is a phenomenal way to visualize it. And if we take that analogy a step further and analyze why society applies those stickers in the first place, it becomes clear that it's a highly sophisticated defensive mechanism.
Right.
And it is incredibly effective. By plastering the word with all these negative, unappealing, extreme stereotypes, society creates a permanent distraction.
So we never talk about the real issues.
Exactly. If we're constantly bogged down in endless debates about whether feminists are just bitter women who can't get husbands or whether they hate chivalry, then we never have to engage with the actual substantive demand inside the suitcase.
That makes total sense.
The stickers do the psychological work of delegitimizing the movement, so the status quo, the people currently holding the power, never has to change a single thing.
But let me push back on this a little bit, or at least, play devil's advocate for the sake of our listeners. Are those stickers entirely fabricated by society?
Okay, fair question.
Because if we look at any movement, political, social, whatever, there are always fringe extremes. There are people who do act out those stereotypes. So how do we explain to someone that the stickers don't represent the suitcase when they can point to someone holding the suitcase who happens to be wearing one of those stickers like a badge of honor?
That's a very fair challenge, and it really gets to the heart of how media and cultural memory work. Yes, in any movement involving millions of human beings over centuries, you will find individuals who exhibit extreme views.
Right.
But the mechanism of oppression works by taking the most extreme, the most unpalatable fraction of a movement and projecting it as the definitive representation of the entire whole.
Oh, I see what you mean.
If a man expresses anger about a social issue, he is seen as a passionate individual. If a woman does it under the banner of feminism, she is used as evidence that the entire philosophy is rooted in hysterical hatred. The fringe is weaponized to invalidate the core.
Wow, yeah.
Adichie's strategy of playfully adopting these labels, the lip gloss, the high heels, is her way of disarming that weaponization. She is proving that the suitcase can hold multitudes.
That makes perfect sense. If I can convince you the suitcase is full of toxic waste based on, like, a rumor of a rumor,
Yeah.
you'll never open it to find out it actually just contains the paperwork for equal pay.
Exactly.
And that transitions us so smoothly into one of the most insidious, difficult to articulate ways gender inequality actually functions in our daily lives. Adichie highlights this brilliantly. Inequality is rarely about a cartoonish villain twirling his mustache and declaring that women are inferior.
No, it's really that obvious.
Usually it's about the invisible default, the things we just accept as normal, as the natural background radiation of our lives. She tells this defining story from when she was a 9-year-old in primary school in Nsukka, which is a university town in Nigeria.
This story is profoundly revealing about exactly how early this socialization begins. We often think of bias as an adult problem, but the seeds are planted in primary school.
Totally. I want you to put yourself in the shoes of a 9-year-old for a second. It's the beginning of the school term. The teacher announces to the class that they are going to take a test, and whoever gets the highest score on this test gets to be the class monitor.
The ultimate prize.
Right. For a kid that age, being class monitor is the ultimate, undisputed prize. It is intoxicating power. You get to stand at the front of the room. You get to write down the names of the noisemakers on the chalkboard.
Oh, the power trip.
Exactly. The teacher even gives you a wooden cane to hold while you patrol the aisles. You're not allowed to actually use the cane on anyone, but just holding the symbol of authority. The prestige was off the charts.
Yeah, she wanted that.
Adichie was a highly ambitious child. She wanted this job more than anything in the world. She studies relentlessly, she takes the test, and she gets the absolute highest score in the entire class.
So by the clearly established rules of the meritocracy the teacher set up, she won. The job is hers.
Exactly. But then, to her total and complete shock, the teacher announces that the monitor has to be a boy.
Just like that?
Just like that.
Yeah.
The teacher hadn't bothered to mention this rule beforehand because, to her mind, it was just entirely obvious. It went without saying. It was a law of physics. So the position of power was handed to the boy who got the second highest score.
And here's where the psychology gets really interesting.
Yeah.
Adichie notes that this boy was a sweet, gentle, quiet soul. He had absolutely zero interest in patrolling the classroom with a stick. He didn't want the power. He didn't want the responsibility.
No.
Adichie was bursting with ambition to do it. She had earned it through her intellect, but she was female and he was male. So against his own desires and against her merit, he became the leader.
It's so frustrating. Let's dive deep into the neurological and sociological implications of this, because Adichie says she has never forgotten that incident, and for very good reason.
Yeah, that classroom is a perfect microcosm of the adult corporate world, the political world, the religious world.
Exactly.
The takeaway here is profound. If we do something over and over and over again, it becomes our baseline for normal. If we see only men in charge repeatedly, whether it's the class monitor, the school principal, the CEO on the news, or the head of state, our brains unconsciously wire themselves to believe that leadership is an inherently biologically male trait.
It just bypasses logic entirely.
Completely. It bypasses the fact that a woman might have the highest test score. It becomes an accepted law of nature in our minds, a hidden architecture that dictates what feels right.
And once it becomes an accepted law of nature, like a default setting in our brains, even brilliant, well-meaning, highly educated people become completely blind to it. Which brings us to the story of Adichie's friend, Louis.
Oh.
Now, she makes a very deliberate point to say Louis is a smart, progressive, forward-thinking guy. But they would get into these debates where Louis would honestly, genuinely say to her, I don't see what you mean by things being different and harder for women. Maybe in the past, sure, but everything is fine now. We've fixed it.
Right, the post-sexism argument.
Adichie just couldn't fathom how he couldn't see the water they were swimming in.
Because he didn't have to see it. And this dynamic is perfectly illustrated by an evening they spent out in Lagos.
Set the scene for us.
For context, Lagos is this incredibly vibrant, pulsating, chaotic metropolis of almost 20 million people. In the evenings, finding a parking spot is basically a competitive sport. So an informal economy has sprung up of young men who dramatically help you find a spot, guide you in with grand theatrical gestures, and promise to watch your car while you're inside.
Okay, got it.
Adichie, Louis, and some friends pull up, and one of these young men does a spectacular, highly entertaining job guiding them into a tight spot.
He puts on a whole show, right? And Adichie's genuinely impressed. So as they're getting out of the car, she decides to tip him. Let's look at the mechanics of this interaction very closely.
This is the important part.
Adichie opens her own purse. She reaches in, takes out her own hard-earned money, and physically hands it to this man. The man takes the cash directly from her hand, is clearly very grateful, and then he looks right past her, locks eyes with Louis, and says with immense gratitude, "Thank you, sir."
It's almost comical in its blatant absurdity, but it's deeply, deeply revealing. Louis was completely shocked. He looks at Adichie genuinely confused and asks, why on earth is he thanking me? I didn't give him the money. You did.
Right.
And in that exact moment, Adichie watches the realization finally dawn on Louis' face.
Okay, I have to play devil's advocate here again because this sort of thing drives me crazy. When Adichie's friend Louis couldn't see the parking attendant's sexism before that moment, is that really just him being a product of his environment, or is it a willful, comfortable ignorance?
That's a tough one.
Because at a certain point, if you're an educated, progressive person living in a modern city, how do you just entirely miss that the woman standing right next to you is being treated as financially invisible? How does he not notice?
It's a great question, and the answer really requires us to look at the very definition of privilege. Privilege is rarely a conscious, malicious plot to keep others down.
Right.
Privilege, in its most insidious form, is the luxury of not having to notice the systems of inequality because those systems are actively working to smooth your path. Louis didn't see the gender dynamics because he was constantly effortlessly benefiting from them.
So the attendant thanking him was just the norm for him.
Exactly. What Louis realized in that parking lot and what Adichie understood immediately is that the parking attendant operated on a fundamental, unshakable cultural assumption. Any money a woman possesses must ultimately have been provided by a man. Even though Adichie was holding the purse, even though she handed over the cash, the attendant's worldview dictated that Louis, simply by virtue of occupying the male body in the group, was the true source of the wealth.
That is wild.
Louis was the default. He don't have to think about gender any more than a fish has to think about the concept of water. It took a jarring anomaly for him to see the tank he was swimming in.
So why is this the default? Where does this deep-seated belief in male dominance actually come from? Because, I appreciate that Adichie doesn't shy away from the biological reality here. She doesn't pretend men and women are biologically identical.
Right, she's very clear about that.
She acknowledges that men have more testosterone, and broadly, statistically speaking, they are physically stronger. And she points out that 1,000 years ago, this made perfect logical sense. In a primitive agrarian world, physical strength was literally the most important attribute for the survival of the species. If your tribe was attacked, or you needed to hunt large animals or build heavy fortifications, the physically stronger person was the most valuable asset, and therefore it was entirely logical that they would lead.
Absolutely. The historical basis of male dominance is fundamentally rooted in brute physical power. But Adichie executes a brilliant pivot here, moving from historical context to modern reality.
Yeah, tell me about that.
She says, look around, we don't live in that world anymore. We are not 1,000 years in the past. We live in a highly modernized, technologically advanced, infinitely complex global society.
Exactly.
Today, the person most qualified to lead a company, a country, or a classroom is not the person who can lift the heaviest boulder. It is the person who is the most intelligent, the most knowledgeable, the most emotionally intelligent, the most creative, and the most innovative.
And here is the kicker, the absolute crux of the argument. There are no hormones for those attributes.
Right.
A woman is just as likely to be intelligent, creative, and innovative as a man. Society has evolved at lightning speed. The requirements for leadership and success have evolved drastically. But our cultural ideas of gender have remained stubbornly, dangerously stuck in the primitive past.
She emphasizes this massive, glaring gap between our modern reality and our ancient gender ideas by referencing Wangari Maathai, the late, great Kenyan environmentalist and Nobel Peace Laureate.
Oh, she's incredible. What did she say?
Maathai had this incredibly simple, yet devastatingly accurate observation. The higher you go, the fewer women there are. Globally, women make up roughly 52% of the human population. They are the mathematical majority of human beings on the planet.
Yeah.
Yet if you look at the apex of any industry, most positions of power, wealth, political influence, and prestige, they are overwhelmingly occupied by men.
She even brings up the Lilly Ledbetter Fair Pay Act in the United States, which is a perfect real-world application of this theory. It really is. When you strip away all the dense political and legal jargon, the Ledbetter Act is fundamentally about addressing a bizarre reality. A man and a woman can be sitting at identical desks, doing the exact same job, with the exact same educational qualifications, producing the exact same results, and the man is legally permitted, well, historically anyway, to be paid more simply because he possesses a Y chromosome.
It's absurd when you put it like that.
It is a structural, legalized reinforcement of that ancient physical strength equals inherent value mindset, aggressively applied to a modern corporate world where physical strength is completely and utterly irrelevant to the job at hand.
And this systemic erasure of women's value doesn't just happen on a macroeconomic legal scale. It happens in everyday, infuriating, exhausting ways.
Yeah, she talks about her life in Lagos a lot.
Right. Adichie shares multiple experiences of this as an adult living in Lagos. Consider something as simple as trying to walk into a reputable hotel by yourself. When she attempts this, the guards at the entrance will physically stop her and subject her to a humiliating interrogation. Yes, what's the name of the person you're visiting? What's their room number? Can you prove you're an actual guest?
I want you, the listener, to really internalize how exhausting that would be. The automatic, deeply ingrained assumption of the guards is that a Nigerian woman walking into a nice hotel alone must be a sex worker.
Exactly.
It is completely inconceivable to the societal default setting that a woman might just be a successful professional paying for her own room with her own money. Now, contrast that with a man walking into that exact same hotel alone. He is never harassed. He is never interrogated.
Nope.
He is instantly afforded the benefit of the doubt. The immediate assumption is that his presence is legitimate, professional, and unquestionable.
And Adichie raises a brilliant, somewhat biting analytical point here about the hypocrisy of this policing. She asks, if society is truly so deeply concerned about the morality of sex work, why do these establishments endlessly harass the ostensible supply, the women, rather than interrogating the demand, the men who are supposedly inside purchasing these services?
Oh, that is such a good point.
It's a perfect, crystal clear example of how the policing of behavior and morality is almost exclusively directed at women. She faces identical barriers just trying to go to reputable clubs or bars.
What happens there?
The bouncers literally will not let a woman in alone. She has to be accompanied by a man to validate her existence in a public space. She talks about female friends who arrive at clubs and literally have to link arms with complete male strangers outside the door, begging for their help just to be allowed inside to have a drink.
Wow. And the really insidious part is that even when she is accompanied by a man, the erasure continues right in front of her face. She talked about going to restaurants with male friends. Every single time, without fail, the waiter walks up to the table, greets the man warmly, and completely, utterly ignores her.
It's maddening.
Now, she makes a point to say the waiters aren't actively trying to be malicious. They aren't evil villains. They are simply products of a society that has thoroughly, systematically trained them that men are inherently more important, more worthy of acknowledgement than women.
Right, they're just following the script.
But as Adichie notes, it is one thing to know that intellectually, in your brain, and it is a completely different thing to feel it emotionally in your chest. Every single time she is ignored, she feels invisible. She feels upset. She wants to scream that she is just as human, just as worthy of a simple hello.
It's not one massive trauma. It's 1,000 relentless daily paper cuts that slowly bleed you dry.
Which naturally, logically leads to a very rational, justified human response. Anger.
Oh, yeah.
Adichie wrote an article about exactly this, about what it actually feels like on a daily basis to be young, female, and constantly erased in Lagos. And an acquaintance read it and took it upon themselves to tell her, it's a very angry article. You shouldn't have made it so angry.
The policing of tone again.
I love Adichie's response to this so much because she completely flips the script. She is entirely, unapologetically defiant. She says, of course it was angry. Gender, as it functions today, is a gray, systemic injustice. She's angry, and frankly, she argues that we should all be deeply angry.
Hear, hear.
If you aren't angry about an injustice, if you are complacent, nothing will ever, ever change. Anger, when channeled correctly, has a very long, very effective historical track record of bringing about positive, necessary social change.
But if we read between the lines, the acquaintance's warning wasn't really about the literary or political effectiveness of the article. It was about enforcing the unspoken rules of gender.
Oh, interesting. Say more about that.
The subtext of the warning was basically, anger is not a good look for a woman. It makes you unattractive. Because when a man expresses anger, he is seen as commanding, passionate, a force to be reckoned with. When a woman expresses anger, society views it as inherently threatening, unstable, or shrill.
Right. It breaks the cardinal rule we discussed at the very beginning, that women must, above all else, remain likable.
Exactly. And to illustrate just how deeply damaging this double standard of anger and likability is, Adichie shares two incredible, devastatingly recognizable stories about American women in the modern corporate workplace.
Yes, these stories are so universal they could have happened yesterday in any office in the world.
They really could.
Story number 1. An American woman takes over a high-level managerial position from a man. Now, her male predecessor was known throughout the company as a tough go-getter. He was blunt, he was hard-charging, and he was extremely strict about administrative rules, like signing timesheets.
Okay, setting the stage.
The woman takes the job, imagining herself to be equally tough, equally competent, but maybe aiming to be a bit kinder in her delivery. A few weeks into the job, she catches an employee blatantly forging a timesheet. She disciplines the employee, doing exactly, to the letter, what her male predecessor would have done.
And what is the immediate result?
It's so predictable.
The disciplined employee bypasses her completely and complains to top management about her leadership style. They call her aggressive. They claim she is difficult to work with. Other employees chime in, complaining that they had fully expected her to bring a nurturing woman's touch to the management role, and they were deeply disappointed that she hadn't. It is a stunning textbook display of cognitive dissonance.
It genuinely didn't occur to a single one of these employees that they were actively punishing a woman for demonstrating the exact same leadership traits for which they had just praised and promoted a man.
Not for a second.
Let me ask you, the listener, to reflect on your own workplace for a second. Have you ever sat in a meeting or read an annual review and seen a female colleague labeled aggressive or abrasive for doing the exact same thing a male colleague was called assertive or driven for?
It happens all the time.
The goalposts are completely unfairly different. A man is judged purely on his competence. A woman is judged on her competence and her strict compliance with gender norms. If she is competent but fails to be appropriately nurturing, she fails the societal test.
Which brings us to story number 2, which honestly breaks my heart a little bit every time I read it.
Yeah, this one is tough.
Another American friend of Adichie's works as a high-ranking advertising executive. She's one of only 2 women on her entire executive team. They are in a high-stakes meeting, and she pitches an idea. Her boss completely ignores her. Crickets. A few minutes later, a male colleague chimes in and pitches essentially the exact same idea, and the boss praises him for his absolute brilliance.
It is the classic infuriating workplace scenario.
Exactly. Now remember, she is a high-level, highly educated executive. She is not naive. She knows exactly what just happened. She knows she was slighted. She desperately wants to speak up. She wants to challenge her boss and rightfully claim her intellectual property.
But she doesn't.
She doesn't. Instead, she sits through the rest of the meeting in agonizing silence, goes to the office bathroom, and cries out of sheer impotent frustration.
That is just awful.
When she later explains this to Adichie, she says she didn't speak up because she didn't want to seem aggressive or difficult. She actively chose to let her resentment simmer and essentially swallow her own career advancement rather than risk violating the mandate to remain likable.
This right here is where we see the true, silent devastation of this socialization. Adichie observes how deeply intrinsically invested women are in being liked and how this specific brand of likable is actually a sophisticated trap.
It really is a trap.
It is a very narrow, suffocating box that explicitly excludes showing anger, being aggressive, claiming your own achievements, or even just disagreeing a little too loudly. As you pointed out in our opening hook, we spend immense amounts of societal energy teaching girls to constantly monitor what others think of them, to modulate their tone, to be endlessly accommodating. But we simply do not have a parallel curriculum for boys. There is zero societal pressure on boys to ensure they are pleasing or nurturing to women in the boardroom or the classroom.
No, the pressure on boys is entirely different, but this is a crucial pivot in Adichie's argument, and one that I think catches a lot of readers by surprise.
Yeah, people don't expect this part.
Feminism is so often falsely painted as being inherently anti-men, but Adichie dedicates a massive, deeply empathetic portion of this text to explaining how the current rules of gender are actively, systematically destroying boys too.
Yes, exactly.
She argues that we do a catastrophic disservice to boys in how we raise them. We actively stifle their full humanity. We define masculinity in an incredibly narrow, punishing way. She uses this haunting metaphor that I just can't shake. She says masculinity is a hard, small cage, and we brutally force young boys to live inside it.
Let's explore the architecture of that cage. We teach boys from the moment they can walk to be terrified of fear, of weakness, of vulnerability. They are taught to violently mask their true emotional selves, to be a hard man, to never cry.
And the financial expectations inextricably tied to this performance of masculinity are staggering. She gives a very grounded example of teenagers going on a date in secondary school. They are children. Both of them have incredibly meager pocket money.
Right.
Yet the boy is entirely, unquestionably expected to pay the bill to prove his nascent masculinity. It is a financial test of his worth as a human being. Adichie rightly asks a provocative question, and we wonder why boys are more likely to steal money from their parents.
The pressure to perform this material provider role, even as a child, is immense and crushing. She asks a beautiful, radical what if here. What if we just didn't link masculinity to money? What if we just taught kids a new baseline? Whoever has more should pay, regardless of gender.
That would change everything.
Obviously, because of historical systemic advantages, men generally have more money today. But imagine if we started raising children without that specific gendered financial pressure. In 50 or 100 years, boys wouldn't grow up feeling that their core identity, their very right to call themselves a man, relied on their ability to pick up a dinner tab.
But the psychological consequence of locking boys in this hard, small cage is the real hidden tragedy of the patriarchy. By forcing men to always appear invincible, always be the stoic provider, always hide their complex emotions, we leave them with incredibly dangerously fragile egos.
Oh, the fragile ego. This is huge.
Adichie states a psychological truth so clearly here. The harder a man feels socially compelled to be on the outside, the weaker and more fragile his ego actually is on the inside. True, resilient emotional strength allows for vulnerability. Enforced, performative toughness merely creates a glass jaw.
I have to pause and throw a hypothetical at you.
Yeah.
Because this concept of the fragile ego is so central to everything. If men are conditioned from birth to be the ultimate providers, the invincible rocks, isn't it psychologically incredibly jarring when that role is suddenly flipped?
Oh, absolutely.
If a man loses his job or his wife starts out earning him, it's not just a financial shift. To him, based on his conditioning, it's an existential crisis.
Yeah.
How do we deprogram that without causing massive identity crises for half the population?
That is the million-dollar question, and it is exactly why feminism is a project of collective liberation, not just female liberation. Deprogramming the provider equals man equation requires us to redefine human value entirely. An identity crisis is inevitable for men transitioning out of the patriarchy. But it's a necessary growing pain to reach a state where a man can feel worthy simply for who he is, his kindness, his partnership, his intellect, rather than what his paycheck represents. Until we achieve that, the cycle remains a tragedy for everyone.
Because we raise boys to have these incredibly fragile, easily threatened egos, we then have to raise girls with the specific skill set required to constantly cater to and protect those egos.
Yes, the constant caretaking.
We actively teach girls to shrink themselves. We tell them, you can have ambition, absolutely, but not too much ambition.
Yeah.
You can aim to be successful, but don't be too successful. Otherwise, you will threaten the man.
It's exhausting.
We teach women that if they happen to be the primary breadwinner in their family, they need to pretend they aren't, especially in public spaces, just to protect the man's delicate pride.
Which brings Adichie to a word she absolutely vehemently despises: emasculation. She openly questions why this concept is even allowed to exist in our cultural vocabulary. Why on earth should a woman's success, a woman's brilliance, or a woman's earning power be viewed as a threat to a man's core identity?
I love the story she tells about this.
Yeah, she tells a story about a Nigerian acquaintance who once actually asked her with genuine concern if she was worried that men would be intimidated by her immense intellect and global success.
Ron, what did she say?
Her response was absolutely perfect. She said she wasn't worried at all because a man who would be easily intimidated by her success is exactly the kind of man she would have absolutely no interest in ever associating with anyway.
It is the perfect logical shutdown. But she is also deeply pragmatic. She acknowledges that despite her own confidence, the structural suffocating pressure is still very much there. Because she is female, society dictates that she must constantly keep marriage in mind as her ultimate defining aspiration.
Everything is filtered through that.
Everything she does, every single choice she makes, her education, her career, her public persona, is supposed to be filtered through the anxious lens of, will this make me less marriageable?
Right.
Now, she is clear that marriage can be a wonderful thing, a source of joy and a great partnership. But her point is that we simply do not teach boys to aspire to it the way we brainwash girls to aspire to it. For women, marriage is treated not as a partnership, but as the ultimate validation of their very existence.
And the extreme lengths women are forced to go to because of this pressure are genuinely shocking. Adichie talks about a Nigerian woman she knows who literally decided to sell her own house because she was terrified that owning property would intimidate potential suitors.
That is just heartbreaking.
She actively diminished her own hard-earned financial security, literally shrinking her footprint in the world just to make herself a smaller, less threatening, more palatable target for a husband. She mentions another unmarried woman who wears a fake wedding ring whenever she goes to professional conferences. Why? Because she knows, from bitter experience, that a wedding ring will automatically grant her a level of baseline respect and professional authority from her male colleagues that she, as an independent single woman, would be flatly denied. The ring acts as a protective shield against dismissal.
And you can see this profound imbalance baked right into the very language we use. Adichie points out that the language we use around marriage is so often, insidiously, a language of ownership, rather than a language of mutual partnership.
Oh, the phrasing is so important here.
Examine the phrase, I did it for peace in my marriage. Think about what that phrase actually means in practice, depending on who is saying it. When a man says he compromised for peace in his marriage, he's usually talking about giving up something relatively trivial, something he probably shouldn't be doing in the first place.
Like what?
Like, oh, my wife was mad, so for peace of my marriage, I stopped going to the club every single night with my friends. It's said with a sort of fond, boys will be boys exasperation.
Right, it's a minor behavioral adjustment for him. But when a woman says, I did it for peace in my marriage, it almost always means she has abandoned a massive core part of her identity.
She gave up a promotion that would have required travel. She quit a job she loved. She let go of a lifelong dream.
We socialize women from infancy to believe that compromise in a relationship means sacrificing their own potential, their own spark, purely to maintain the man's comfort and keep his fragile ego intact.
And this relentless policing of women doesn't stop at their ambitions. It extends deeply aggressively into their physical bodies and their sexuality. Society heavily praises and meticulously guards female virginity, but nobody cares even slightly about male virginity.
It's totally ignored.
Adichie points out the glaring biological absurdity of this double standard, noting that losing one's virginity generally involves two people. So how can one gender be held to an impossibly strict moral standard, facing ruin and shame, while the other gender is completely ignored or even praised for the exact same act?
The darkest, most destructive extreme of this bodily policing is the culture of victim blaming. Adichie recounts a horrific incident where a young woman was gang raped on a university campus in Nigeria.
This part is so hard to read.
The response from many young people, and she notes this included both males and females, which really shows how deeply this toxic socialization infects everyone, was to say, yes, obviously rape is wrong, but what was a girl doing in a room with 4 boys?
Notice where the focus instantly shifts. It is entirely focused on what the girl allegedly did wrong to provoke the crime, rather than the criminality of the perpetrators.
Exactly. Adichie is furiously right about this. She points out 2 terrifying, interconnected things about that cultural response. First, that society raises people to view women as inherently guilty, inherently suspect, simply by existing in certain spaces.
Her mere presence is deemed a provocation.
Right. And second, that society expects so shockingly little of men that the idea of them acting as savage animals with absolutely zero moral self-control is somehow treated as an accepted, inevitable baseline reality.
It's like the boy's horrific actions are viewed as an uncontrollable force of nature, like a hurricane, and the girl is blamed for stupidly standing in the rain.
It's all deeply rooted in the project of teaching girls shame. Shut your mouth, close your legs, cover yourself up. Girls are made to feel that just by being born female, they have already committed some sort of original sin, some inherent crime they need to constantly apologize for through modesty and silence.
Consequently, they grow up into adult women who cannot freely express desire, who silence their own brilliant opinions, and who become absolute masters of pretense.
Yes, pretense is a huge theme.
Adichie talks about a woman she knows who absolutely loathes domestic work, but she desperately wanted to get married. And society told her in no uncertain terms that to be considered good wife material, she had to be homely, which in this Nigerian context means highly domestic, submissive, and home-loving.
So what does she do?
She fakes it. She pretends to love cooking and cleaning and being subservient until she successfully secures the husband. But of course, psychology tells us you cannot fake your core personality forever.
No, eventually the mask slips.
Once she was safely married, she got tired of the grueling performance and simply stopped. And her husband's family was completely outraged, claiming she had deceitfully changed. But she hadn't changed at all. She had just finally stopped performing the exhausting character society forced her to play.
Adichie summarizes this entire tragic dynamic beautifully when she says, "The fundamental problem with gender is that it aggressively prescribes how we should be, rather than acknowledging and celebrating how we actually are."
Which is such a profoundly liberating thought when you let it sink in. Imagine how much happier, more productive, and more peaceful everyone, men and women, would be if we didn't have the suffocating artificial weight of gender expectations crushing our individuality from the moment we are born.
And Adichie does a brilliant job in the next section of systematically dismantling the flimsy excuses we constantly use to maintain these expectations. The biggest, most persistent excuse, of course, is biology.
Oh, the pseudoscience.
People love to lean on pseudoscience and say, well, women are just naturally biologically wired for domestic tasks. Take cooking, for example. Women perform the vast, overwhelming majority of the unpaid cooking in households globally. Is this because women possess some magical, inherent cooking gene woven into their DNA?
Adichie is so sharp and funny here. She says she was almost ready to believe in the existence of the female cooking gene until she took a step back and realized something glaring. If you look at the absolute top tier of the professional culinary world, the people who are paid exorbitant amounts of money, the people who are given Michelin stars and the prestigious revered title of chef, the vast overwhelming majority of them are men.
Right, so clearly it's not a biological incapacity or a lack of innate skill on the part of men. It is entirely 100% about socialization, economics, and power.
When cooking is exhausting, unpaid daily domestic labor, it is deemed women's work. But the moment cooking transforms into a high-status, high-paying, prestigious career, men suddenly magically dominate the field.
It is entirely structural. She gives a very relatable example of a family she knows with a teenage son and a teenage daughter. When the boy announces he is hungry, the parents immediately look at the daughter and say, "Go to the kitchen and cook some Indomie noodles for your brother."
Oh, come on.
The girl doesn't want to do it. She has her own things to do, but she has to comply because she's the girl. Adichie asks the blindingly obvious question that cuts right through the tradition: why not just teach both of them to cook?
Exactly. Cooking is a fundamental, basic survival skill for a human organism. Why on earth would you send a young boy out into the adult world unable to physically nourish himself? Why would you intentionally cripple his independence just to rigidly maintain an outdated gender role?
But unlearning all of this, these deep-seated biological myths, these behavioral expectations, is incredibly difficult. Adichie is very honest about her own struggles here. She admits she is constantly trying to unlearn these internalized lessons herself.
She tells a very vulnerable, relatable story about her first time teaching a graduate writing class.
Yeah, she does. She was highly confident in her material. She knew she was a great writer, and she knew she was a capable teacher. But she was utterly paralyzed by a seemingly trivial decision: what to wear.
She knew that as a young female stepping into academia, she was walking into a room with a massive pre-existing deficit of authority. She knew she would have to aggressively prove she deserved to be standing at the front of that room.
Let's really pause and examine the psychology of authority aesthetics here, because it is fascinating. She thought to herself, if she looked too feminine, she wouldn't be taken seriously by the academic establishment.
Right.
She really wanted to wear her shiny lip gloss and a girly, colorful skirt. It was how she felt most like herself. But she actively, painfully suppressed her own personality. She chose instead to wear a very serious, very masculine, and in her own words, very ugly suit.
Because the sad, unspoken truth of our society is that masculinity is the default standard for competence. The male aesthetic, the suit, the tie, the muted colors, is the universally accepted baseline for professionalism and intellect.
The less feminine a woman looks, the more society is willing to grant her intellectual authority. A man never has to stand in front of his closet in the morning, gripped by anxiety, worrying that his choice of tie is going to fundamentally undermine his perceived competence.
But Adichie looks back on that specific moment with deep regret. She wishes she hadn't compromised herself and worn the ugly suit. She realizes now that if she had just worn what made her feel comfortable, confident, and happy, she actually would have been a much better, more vibrant teacher that day.
Because she would have been fully, authentically herself, rather than expending massive amounts of mental energy playing a rigid role. So now she actively, joyfully reclaims it.
She wears the high heels.
She wears the bright lip gloss. She enthusiastically embraces her love of politics, literature, and history right alongside her love of fashion and makeup. She says the male gaze, the idea of dressing to be attractive to men, is largely incidental to her choices now. She dresses purely for herself.
It's an incredibly powerful reclamation of self. It's about rejecting the false dichotomy that you can either be smart or feminine. But of course, whenever you challenge the status quo, whenever you start breaking down the cage, you are going to get pushback.
Oh, the system always protects itself.
And the last major section of our deep dive today focuses on how Adichie expertly tackles the most common, stubborn pushbacks against feminism. We hear these arguments all the time, in comment sections, at dinner tables, in boardrooms.
The first one is the classic semantic argument. Why do you have to be so divisive and use the specific word feminist? Why not just soften it and say you are a believer in human rights?
It's such a common deflection, isn't it? It sounds so reasonable on the surface. But Adichie's answer is brilliant. She says that using the vague, broad term human rights is fundamentally intellectually dishonest.
It is a deliberate form of erasure.
Yes, of course, feminism is inherently a human rights issue. But to refuse to name the specific, targeted victims of this particular injustice is to pretend the exact mechanism of the injustice doesn't exist.
Let's look at the history. For centuries, the world explicitly divided humans into two distinct categories and systematically, legally, and violently oppressed one of those categories, specifically because they were female.
To turn around now, after all that specific targeting, and say, hey, let's just hold hands and say we want human rights, completely ignores the fact that the problem wasn't about being human generally. It was specifically and aggressively about being a female human. It is only logical and fair that the solution must acknowledge the specific target of the problem.
Then there's the evolutionary biology pushback, which always rears its head. People will say, well, look at the animal kingdom, look at apes. Female apes bow to male apes. It's just the natural, inescapable evolutionary order of things.
Adichie's response to this is incredibly dry and absolutely perfect. She just deadpans, we are not apes. Apes also live in trees and eat earthworms. We do not.
It highlights the sheer absurdity of the argument. We have evolved past primitive physical hierarchies. We invented the internet. We put rovers on Mars. So trying to use primate behavior to justify denying a woman a promotion in an air-conditioned office building is intellectually bankrupt.
Another major and slightly more complex pushback she addresses is the intersection of class and gender. People will often say, well, feminism ignores that poor men have a really, really hard time too.
And Adichie completely agrees with the premise. They do have a hard time. But she points out that class and gender are different, distinct axes of oppression.
Right.
A poor man suffers immensely because of his class status, but he still retains the baseline privilege of his gender. He may not have a dollar to his name, but he won't be automatically assumed to be a sex worker if he walks into a hotel lobby.
To illustrate this intersectionality clearly, she brings up an interaction with a black man. They were debating gender issues, and he challenged her, saying, why does it always have to be about you as a woman? Why not just speak as a human being?
He was actively trying to silence her specific gendered experience.
And Adichie points out the glaring hypocrisy here, noting that this exact same man frequently, and very rightly, spoke out about his specific painful experiences as a black man. He completely understood that his race profoundly affected his journey in the world, but he was willfully blind to how her gender affected hers.
The insight here is crucial. Experiencing oppression in one area of your life does not automatically grant you empathy or vision in another.
I think that's one of the most important takeaways of the whole book. Then there is the infamous bottom power argument. For those unfamiliar, this is the idea that women actually hold the real power in society because they can use their sexuality to manipulate men into giving them what they want.
Adichie shuts this down immediately and definitively. She argues that having to manipulate someone else to get what you want is not power. It is the very definition of dependency.
As she says, if you rely on bottom power, you are just finding a degrading route to temporarily tap into a man's actual power. And what happens if the man is sick or in a bad mood or just decides to say no? Your power vanishes. True, real power is having autonomy over your own life.
Finally, we arrive at the biggest, most stubborn, most deeply entrenched defense of the patriarchy. It's just our culture. People constantly claim that female subordination is simply the traditional culture. It has always been this way, and therefore it cannot and should not be changed.
Adichie absolutely dismantles this excuse. She argues, historically and sociologically, that culture is never, ever static. It is constantly evolving and adapting. She uses a stunning, undeniable historical example from her own Igbo heritage to prove this.
100 years ago, traditional Igbo culture deeply believed that the birth of twins was an evil, supernatural omen, and newborn twins were systematically taken away and killed.
It was a horrific, deeply embedded cultural practice.
But today, as she joyfully points out, she has beautiful 15-year-old twin nieces. The idea of harming them is utterly, completely unimaginable to any modern Igbo person. The culture changed.
Why? Because culture is simply a tool designed to ensure the survival and prosperity of a people. When a practice no longer serves that goal, when it is recognized as harmful, it is discarded.
And she feels the painful sting of this culture argument very personally in her own life. She tells us that she's the unofficial family historian. She knows the lineage. She cares deeply about their ancestral lands and traditions, arguably much more than her brothers do.
But because Igbo culture privileges men, she is strictly forbidden from attending the official meetings where major family decisions are made. She is entirely locked out of shaping the very traditions she cherishes and studies, simply because she was born female.
It brings her to one of the most powerful, resonant conclusions in the entire book. Culture does not make people. People make culture. If the full humanity of women is not currently our culture, then we have the power and the profound moral obligation to make it our culture.
Which brings us beautifully back to the definition, back to the beginning. She returns to the actual dictionary she consulted as a scared 14-year-old girl after Oklahoma called her a terrorist.
The dictionary defined a feminist as a person who believes in the social, political, and economic equality of the sexes. Period. It's that simple. There are no stipulations about hating men or burning bras.
She looks back at her own great-grandmother, a fierce woman who rebelled against a forced marriage and actively fought for her own land rights. Her great-grandmother didn't know the English word, but by her actions she was absolutely a feminist.
And Adichie offers her own beautifully updated, incredibly inclusive definition to close out her thoughts. She says, a feminist is a man or a woman who says, yes, there's a problem with gender as it is today, and we must fix it. We must do better.
I love that so much. It's an open invitation. It's not an exclusive club with a strict dress code. It's a call to action for everyone who believes in basic fairness.
So, why does this little book matter so much? Why is it considered such an essential modern classic? Because it acts as a very clear, uncompromising mirror. It forces us to look at our own hidden biases, the things we accept as the invisible default.
It takes the concept of feminism down from the high, intimidating ivory tower of academic theory, strips away the highly politicized jargon, and turns it into a deeply human, everyday, practical practice of unlearning.
And who benefits from reading this? Literally everyone. If you are a parent raising the next generation, this book will fundamentally change how you talk to your sons and your daughters about their potential.
If you're a professional navigating complex workplace dynamics, it will open your eyes to the invisible currents of bias in your office. And if you are just a human being who wants to shed the heavy, exhausting baggage of societal expectations and live as your true, complex, authentic self, this book is a vital roadmap. It's ultimately a book about freedom.
Exactly. It's about recognizing the cage and then doing the work to dismantle it.
So before we wrap up today's deep dive, I want to leave you, the listener, with a final thought to really mull over. Think about the everyday spaces you occupy on a regular basis, your kitchen, your workplace, your local coffee shop. The next time you are sitting there, just look around the room and ask yourself a quiet question. Who in this space is automatically given the benefit of the doubt? And who is quietly, invisibly shrinking themselves just to make others comfortable?
That is a very powerful lens to look through. It changes how you see the world.
We want to thank you so much for joining us for this deep dive into Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie's work. Don't forget to subscribe to the Book Nook so you never miss an exploration of these life-changing ideas. Our absolute goal here is to keep growing together, unpacking our biases, and expanding our minds through the power of these incredible texts.
And we want to hear from you. Drop a comment below and tell us which book you'd like us to explore next. We read every single one.